Little magnums, specifically little handgun magnums, little calibers that can. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Bio bullet points in the show notes. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. Let's talk about this. I'm going to let out some parameters here in the beginning. I'm going to say little magnums, smaller than 357 Magnum in the revolver world, and smaller than 10 millimeter in the semi-auto world. And they may not have Magnum in the title, but I would consider them a Magnum. The first one I'm going to talk about, instead of Magnum, it has Super in the title. So it's super cool. The 38Super, Super Automatic. This is a cool cartridge, I believe, in my research, developed in 1929. The lure is it was developed for 1911s of the era to give lawmen the ability to better fight crime and the Prohibition era gangsters and organized crime and bootleggers and all that stuff that was going on. They wanted, I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but they wanted a round that would better penetrate the automobile materials of the day. And as you might imagine, the automobiles of the 1920s were probably made a little bit thicker with body material than they are today. So the 38 Super, it's a pretty cool round. I would consider it, depending on your pressure, equivalent to Magnums today. 38 Super is a good cartridge. Let us look at some numbers, and to give credit where credit is due here, I'm going to talk about Wikipedia. If we look at the 38 Super, it's got 130 grain Magtech load at 12.15. It's not bad. There's 115 grain loading Buffalo, I assume Buffalo bore, at 14.50. Now, to give you a rough idea, 115 grain 9mm, generally 12.50-ish, right? This is a Buffalo bore 115 grain at 14.50. I would consider that a Magnum. There's a 147 grain double tap at 12.25. Now, to give you a rough idea, in my head, a 147 grain 9mm, for rough numbers, is 950. It might be closer to like 980, 985, but that would be a standard 147 grain 9mm. This 38 Super is launching on 147 at 12.25. They've got a Remington UMC 130 grain load at 12.15. Not bad. So these are some good numbers, right? It's got a max pressure of 36,500 PSI for the 1920s in a pistol. That's pretty good. So those are impressive numbers. There are some variants. You guys that listen long enough know that I'm a big-time competition shooter. One of the ones that was popular for quite a while in competition shooting was the 38 TJ for Todd Jarrett. Todd Jarrett was a big shooter and one of my favorites back in the day. And he has a variant of this, the TJ. As you might know or might not know, the regular 38 Super is a semi-rimmed cartridge. So there are some variants to help them feed better in semi-autos, although there isn't a big issue with that. There's also the 38 Super Comp. The reason for this is the rules in USPSA competitions, they go on magazine length. So you're going to get more of these to fit in an open class gun, and there's a minimum power factor. So the 38 Super family will generally meet that major power factor so that you're getting more points if you drop a hit out of the A zone. If you get all A's, it doesn't matter. But if you drop one into the C, you'll get more points for a major class than a minor class. And the open division in USPSA, without getting too nerdy, is kind of where the 38 Supers have stayed in the shooting world largely. There are some collectors and stuff that want an old 1911 in 38 Super, but you'll see a lot of the 2011s and things like that in 38 Super. And the USPSA guys have really been the ones keeping the 38 Super and the variants thereof alive for almost a century since its inception. I forget when practical shooting USPSA got really started. I want to say the 80s. With like the Soldier of Fortune stuff and Jeff Cooper and those kind of things. But since then, the 38 Super has found a pretty good following. And it's a pretty good small Magnum. And I would consider it one of the original small Magnums. Now another one, the 327 Federal Magnum. This one's fairly new. It's not ancient like the one we just talked about, but it's a fairly new cartridge. And it's kind of a retake of an older cartridge, the 327 H&R Magnum, which maybe you consider a Magnum. I guess considering like the old whatever, like it was 32 Colt, it's a Magnum, but really nothing to write home about. The 327 Federal Magnum is advertised as giving you close to the power of a 357 without the recoil and with one extra round and small revolver. That's kind of its whole stick. Now, it doesn't really give you the power of a 357 Magnum. If you take like a really vanilla 357 Magnum and a really hot 327 Federal Magnum, yeah, you can get pretty close. But it's not the equivalent or as flexible, in my opinion, as a 357 Magnum. But this is a small Magnum. So if you want a small Magnum, this is it. And out of the proper firearm, the proper barrel length, and the proper bullet construction, all those caveats being met, if you put the bullet in the right place, suitable for medium game, I would say. And it definitely, I would say, I don't know about the 327 H&R Magnum, but I would consider the 327 Federal Magnum an actual Magnum. Let's look at the numbers. You're going down to 27 caliber, so your bullet weights are generally going to be lower, but 100-grain bullet at 1,400 feet a second for 435 foot-pounds of energy. It's a little bit more than it's a bit more than a standard 9mm right there. 115 grain at 1,300 feet a second. 100 grain at 1,650 feet per second, and 115 grain at 1,587 feet per second, and those are going to give you in the 600 foot-pounds of energy. And that's the difference between a longer barrel length. The other ones have a barrel length of a 5.5-inch Blackhawk revolver. So again, right gun, right bullet selection, it would be okay for medium game. I would definitely consider that for handgun hunting, marginal for medium game. But in that longer barrel, 5.5 inches, that is quite a bit of velocity gain. And 100 grain at 1655 for 640 foot-pounds, that's, I would consider a Magnum. 45,000 psi is going to be your max pressure there. And yeah, I would definitely consider that a Magnum for sure. And if you're carrying something like a J-frame and you want to go from 5 shots to 6 shots, it's not a bad defensive option for a revolver cartridge. Now, I generally don't think the juice is worth the squeeze here because you're giving up all the commonality of 38 Special, 38 Special Plus B, 357 Magnum, which is the other caliber you're probably going to get it in, for a very niche cartridge without a lot of different loads, without a lot of aftermarket support that's going to be more expensive to shoot unless you reload. So all those caveats, if all that means that you want that one extra round in that small revolver or an extra round or two in a medium frame revolver, okay, that's what it's there for. And they've tried this with the 320, the 32 H&R Magnum. I may have called it the 327. It's the 32 H&R Magnum, I do believe. And they've tried this in the past. It doesn't really catch on. There are a few people that clamp onto it, but it's not going to replace the 38 Special, the 357 Magnum. There's really no way in my brain that's ever going to work out. The juice is not worth the squeeze. But it's a decent small round. So if you're looking for a decent small round, that one could be it. Moving right along here, let's look at one of my favorites. Probably my favorite on the list. And it's okay to have favorites. I'm just telling you up front, it's mine. The 357 SIG. Now, to be fair, they kind of do a similar thing here where they're like, we can duplicate a 357 Magnum in a semi-automatic handgun. And kind of with a bunch of caveats. If you're looking at a plain vanilla 357 Magnum, 125 grain hollow point, which is what they were trying to duplicate, to be fair, for man stopping, good reputation, good street cred, of being a good, self-defense / law enforcement round. Yeah, they pretty much do that. but it doesn't do well with the heavier bullets. It's nowhere near as flexible as the revolver round 357 Magnum, but it's a hot rod. It's definitely a small Magnum. When I think of small handgun Magnums, to me, this is the quintessential small Magnum. 357 SIG, designed by SIG. I don't remember exactly when it came out, but I want to say the 90s-ish, maybe the early 2000s. It's a great round. If you don't know, it's kind of odd because it's a bottleneck pistol round. You don't see a lot of these. The only real other common one today I'm not going to talk about because, one, I don't consider it a Magnum, and two, I don't consider it a pistol round. I consider it a PDW round, the 5.7. That's a PDW round that you can put in a pistol. But this is a true pistol round. You could put it in a PDW, but it's a pistol round, 357 SIG, designed primarily for handguns. It's a good round. When I first got my SIG 226 Legion single action only, it was in 357 SIG. It's a good round. You're looking at 40,000 PSI max pressure for a semi-auto. You're looking at 125 grain at 1350 feet per second. And that's pretty good, especially out of like a fighting size handgun, not something with a crazy long barrel, not like a 6-inch barrel. But, 125 grain at 1350, and that's a Federal. That's not bad. There's a double tap load listed of 125 grain at 1450. Again, you're pretty much getting 357 Magnum performance out of a semi-auto handgun. A modern semi-auto. You are getting, what is this? There's a Grizzly load, 90 grain at 1900 feet a second. Whew. That is cruising. That is fast. There's an Underwood loading of 125 grain at 1475, and there's a Corbon loading of 100 grain at 1600 feet a second. Again, that's fast. This is a small Magnum. It's a good round. They do make 147 grain loads for it, but generally you see it in 125 grain and lighter. You may see other grain weights if you really want to shop around, or hand load, but generally 125. It was designed again to duplicate that law enforcement load, and it's a good round. I think it's way better than a round I'm not going to include in this list, and that is the 40 Smith & Wesson. I don't consider the 40 Smith & Wesson a small Magnum. I don't consider it anything more than an egregious wrong put on the American law enforcement officer and or defensive handgun shooter. It's a round that never should have existed, in my opinion. It's a travesty. It is a tragedy it's a comedy of errors put on the American shooting public. I don't like the 40. I think, as soon as the 357 SIG came out, everybody should have went, why would anybody ever get a 40 ever? 357 Magnum is superior, in my opinion, in pretty much every way to the 40 Smith & Wesson. You can make an argument of 10 millimeter, which I'm not going to put on the list because I said smaller than 10 millimeter, but I don't think anybody that's ever shot both or trained with both would ever pick a 40 over a 357 SIG. That said, it never really did catch on. It was used by some pretty big agencies and departments, but it never got the mainline support because the F.B.I. adopted 40, and what F.B.I. does, generally they get a lot of traction, good or bad, and in this case I would say very bad. But the 357 SIG, in my opinion, is way better in pretty much every way, shape, and form as the 40 Smith & Wesson. It's a better round. That's my opinion. You can argue with me that, if it's not 180 grains or better, it's not worth shooting, but I think the 357 SIG is a much better round. That said, it's quite a bit more expensive generally to shoot, unless you get a screaming good deal, than a 40 Smith & Wesson, of which case I would say you're better off not shooting. But call me jaded. I've had to carry 40 Smith & Wessons from time to time. I have to carry one of my current private security contract because they're, stuck in the 90s. But I've been training a bunch with it because it's my duty gun, and it's really kind of sucked the joy and enjoyment out of something I really truly love and enjoy, which is training with a handgun. The 40 Smith & Wesson just sucks the joy right out of it. But the 357 SIG is a good caliber. I consider it more effective. I consider it to have less recoil. It's a bit snappy, but I would still rather shoot it than a 40. It's a good round. Now, one thing to note, despite the name, it's not actually .357 diameter. It's .355, the same diameter as a 9mm. 9mm is .355 diameter. the 357 SIG, for whatever reason, when they developed it, they wanted it to use 9mm projectiles over 357. And this is odd to me because they could have just as easily, I think, made it 357 Magnum or .357 diameter. It's only, 0.02 of an inch. But they chose to go 9mm. But because they wanted this to fit in a standard handgun frames, the bullets generally have to be a flat-fronted bullet. So a lot of the 9mm are round-nosed bullets. A lot of the 357s are flat-nosed bullets anyway. So it's kind of curious to me why they didn't go with a 357 diameter bullet. But if you're getting a .357 SIG, just realize that name, kind of like 38 specials aren't 38 caliber, 357 SIG is not 357 caliber. It's 355 caliber. It's a bottlenecked cartridge down to 9mm. Which is going to bring me to the next one I'm going to talk about. I would not consider 9mm plus P to be a small magnum, but I would consider 9mm plus P plus to be a small magnum. This really reaches into the small magnum territory. I'm not sure who came up with the first, 9mm plus P plus. But I don't believe there's any SAMI specification. There's like a SAMI max ceiling pressure for plus P, which I think is 40,000 PSI. I could be wrong. I think it's 40,000. But there is none for the plus P plus. The plus P plus is just way up there in pressure. Now, that being said, since there's no SAMI standardization on it, this is shot a lot by many different departments. So do your research as to whether your handgun can handle it. But if you have a good, high-quality handgun, it should be able to handle it. You might think, well, if I can shoot plus P, why wouldn't I just shoot plus P plus all the time? Well, you're going to get extra wear on your gun. You are going to get extra recoil. That's just reality, right? That's just how physics works. You're going to get extra recoil, so your shot-to-shot time is going to be slower. Now, I don't care how good you control recoil, how fast you are. The more recoil you have, the longer it takes to get back on target. It just is what it is. You have to decide whether that juice is worth the squeeze. Now, the first one of these I'm going to talk about is a round that I actually have quite a bit of experience with. I shot this when I went to the F.B.I. Firearms Academy to be an F.B.I. Firearms instructor, and it is the Federal 9BPLE. I have quite a bit of, I don't know how much of this ammo that I've shot, but it's a lot. And it's 9mm plus P plus, and it's Federal 9BPLE. Not the coolest name ever. However, it's cooking, and it's got a good proven track record. It's been used for a long time. It's a fairly low-tech, simple hollow point, cup and core type bullet, but it works, and it works rather well. So with that said, what are we looking at? We're looking at a 115 grain bullet at 1,300 feet a second. It's not bad. That's not bad at all for 430-something foot-pounds of energy. It's a good round. And again, it's street-proven. It's got street cred. It's been around a long time, so it's not the latest and greatest. It's just a good, really hot 9mm that works. So if that's what you're looking for, then this is a good option for you. And again, I have a lot of experience with it. It is fairly snappy, but not super hard to control, especially in a full-size fighting handgun. I don't know if I'd want it in a compact or a subcompact. Although I probably did carry it because it's one of the duty-issued rounds that we had at the time. But it's a good round. Now, with that being said, there is another that's pretty good, and it's going to be the Winchester Ranger T. The Winchester Ranger T makes a 127 plus P plus. 127 grain, so you're moving up from 115 to 147, and it's still got a muzzle velocity of 1250 for an energy of 441. This is a good round. I like Winchester Ranger Ts in different flavors. I generally prefer the 147s, but I would not fault you for going this route. It is a high pressure, literally plus P plus, small magnum. I would consider it a small magnum. Those are impressive numbers for a 127 grain at 1250 out of a standard 9mm. And that's a big benefit. You don't have to get all kinds of crazy expensive exotic guns. The baseline, take it or leave it, standard for today in fighting handguns is 9mm. And assuming it's a quality 9mm, not some Turk nasty, but like a quality 9mm, it's probably going to be able to handle a steady diet of these. I don't know how many through my old Gen 1 Smith & Wesson M&P back in the day, of the Federal 9B PLE, that is, plus P+. Glocks. You do your own research. I'm not going to tell you what can or can't handle it. I remember when I was shooting a steady diet of these, I actually contacted the manufacturer to make sure that I could. So I would encourage you to do the same thing if you're like, hey, I might be getting a case of these and shooting a whole bunch. Because here's one of the other big drawbacks to these is if you think, I'm just going to shoot Winchester white box, then I'm going to load my carry ammo up at this super hot plus P+. I'm going to say bad idea. Bad idea for a few reasons. One, the recoil impulse is not going to be the same. So if you're working on timing and shooting and all this other stuff, it's going to be vastly different. So that's going to hurt you there. Another one that's going to hurt you is it's probably not going to shoot where you're aiming. By definition, right? The bullet hitting a certain place on the target is a result of many things, but some of those being bullet grain weight and velocity and shape of bullet. And the odds of these shooting where your normal ammo hit, the same point of aim, point of impact, is very low. And I would not forego, actually hitting what I was aiming at for a little bit more velocity. So if you're going to shoot these, I would say train with them and buy a bunch of them and shoot them and train with them and carry them. If you think you're just going to shoot plain vanilla ammo and then load up your plus P+ for my carrying my gun on my hip, but you're not going to train with them, I would say that's a bad idea. The good thing is some of these loads, like the Federal 9B PLE, is not that expensive for a case. So if you want to go that route, just buy a case of it, 1,000 rounds of it, and shoot it. Make sure it runs in your gun. Make sure you can handle it. Make sure the gun can handle it, and then carry it. But I would definitely consider the 9mm plus P+ to be a small Magnum. These are pretty established loads with some pretty good street cred. Now, I am not going to get into like the Buffalo bore loads and stuff for the 9mm, Buffalo bore core bond, double tap, because as far as I'm aware, none of those are really good street-proven rounds for defense. If you want to use them for hunting or something, that's great. You want to use them for bear defense, if that's what you're going to do, that's cool. Look up those loads on your own. Something like a really hot, I would say just a standard pressure, but if you want to go hot, 147 hard cast bullet, that might also fall into this category. But I'm thinking mostly of the defensive side of the 9mm. Although I have been blessed to take quite a few animals in handgun hunting, and the 9mm was just fine. I would not honestly say that I could tell the difference between taking deer with a 40, a 45, a 9mm, of which I've been blessed to do all of those, I believe. A 357 SIG, of which I think I've only taken a coyote with a 357 SIG. But between a regular 9mm, a plus P+, a 40 Smith & Wesson, a 357 SIG, I honestly can't really tell the difference in what the target did, what the animal did. I don't think it makes enough difference to make a difference. That's why I think the standard is 9mm for good reason. But again, if you want a hot round, you want a hot load, these are some good options. There are some small Magnums. That's the point of today's show. Anyway, guys, I appreciate all that you do. I appreciate any feedback. A very simple, hopefully familiar verse that's very big theological impact for the verse of the day. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. One of the core verses of Jesus being God. Something that angers our Muslim friends because they live in a lie and makes them want to cut our heads off because we speak the truth. But in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That is the beginning of the Gospel of John. Thanks for listening, guys, and have a blessed day.